This episode discusses sensitive topics, including emotional abuse, manipulation, coercive control, and family cult experiences. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is affected by these issues, please prioritize your well-being and seek support if needed. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org.
Welcome to It's Your Story to Tell. I'm your host today, Megan Babcock, and I am here with Jennifer Orr, and I am so thankful for her willingness to come on and share her story today. When I first met Jen and we started talking, we were actually in a business networking group, and so strange that we ended up on the topic of trauma and talking about our stories, but I had never heard of family cults. And I was just, my eyes were wide open. And actually, I started to recognize and see some traits of some things that Jen was sharing in some families and in relationships that I knew about. And I thought, we have to talk about this because I don't think that people really even know what it is, how to identify it, and the implications of living in the situation that you're going to share with us today, Jen. So thank you for coming along and sharing your story with our audience and just bringing an awareness to the topic.
Yes, of course. It is my pleasure. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, let's jump in. And if you don't mind, maybe just setting the groundwork of what is a family cult? What does it look like when we're talking about this? What were you experiencing and living through?
Yeah, I know. Whenever I tell people I was in a family cult, they kind of are taken aback and are like, what is that? Is that even a thing? I've never heard of that before. I think that, we often hear about cults and people are very familiar with cults. But when you add family to the beginning of it, it's what does that even mean? What does that look like? And who knew there was such a thing? So just to break it down a little bit, a family cult in essence operates like a cult. The main difference being it is not a organization. It's not a huge group of people. They may or may not have, religious influence within the cult, but in essence, it operates like a cult, only it is within the confines of the family. And the family can look very different. It could just be that household. It could be an extension of the family. And so that, in essence, is what a family cult is. Now, there's certain characteristics, right, that say that are what make up a cult. And so knowing, okay, well, is my family a family cult? You're looking at these certain characteristics that kind of define how cults operate and how people within the cult operate. And that's what we draw these characteristics off of. So some of those characteristics, just to, list them off, is obviously there's a leader, right? So all cults have a head honcho, a main person that is in charge or is leading the group. The same is the case in a family. There's one person that is the leader of the family, one person that everybody looks up to or is in charge of the family. Oftentimes these are narcissists, oftentimes cult leaders, and maybe often is not even the right word. I think almost I want to say in all cases. I don't know that that's true or not, so I won't say that. But in majority of the time, these cult leaders are narcissists or sociopaths. That is that is their being, and that is their characteristic, and that's how they become in this place of power or leadership, is through those narcissistic characteristics and tendencies. And so that's one characteristic. They have power over everyone else. What they say goes. It's their way of the highway. Now, this is more than just an opinion, right? I know very opinionated people out there who it's their way or the highway. This is beyond that. It is to the extent that if you don't believe what they believe, if you don't think what they think, then you are ridiculed, you're berated, you're harshly judged, sometimes even punished for doing anything outside of or thinking outside of the way that they think. And so it's not, there is no such thing as agree to disagree. It is you either agree and fall in line, or there's consequences. And so that's the main difference. Other characteristics of cults that show up in a family cult is an element of indoctrination, right? The one person feels and thinks a certain way. That could be religious. That could be simply they have a thought or belief on how tomatoes should be cut. And this is something I experienced, right? And so they just have their specific things that they know are just true for them, and then they indoctrinate that into all of its members. So whether family members or whether it members of the cult, they have these rules, these ideals that they are trying to teach you for you to believe. And that's the same across the board. Also, another characteristic is isolation. Cult leaders will isolate the members of the group, right? A lot of these big organizations, we see complete communities fenced off where all of their members live within a community. They don't interact with the outside world. They live next door to each other. They are isolated from the outside world oftentimes, right? Internet use is restricted or banned. And the sole purpose of that is to keep them only surrounded by the people that are subscribing to whatever the leader is saying. The same goes for a family cult. The leader in the family is going to try to isolate you from friends, from social media, from the outside world, because the more influence you have from the outside, the more opportunity you have to think differently, right? And they don't want you to think differently because they want to indoctrinate you into their belief system. And so isolation is huge. If you are, in a family or in a situation where you are being isolated, you are not allowed to have friends, you're not allowed to go to social events or activities, or even within the workplace. Maybe you're not allowed to go to work conferences or work-related activities, things like that, to isolate you. Another characteristic is abuse. There is always abuse involved. They do harm to their members. All cult leaders do. Now, some of that is more extreme than others. There's verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, but on some level, there is abuse happening within the confines of that cult. They also discourage individualization. So, you're not allowed to be your own person. You're not allowed to, it goes back to not having your own opinions and ideas, but you're not allowed to even be you. Anything that differentiates you from somebody else, it's not allowed. You look at these big cults where they're all wearing the same style of clothes. They all have the same hairstyle. The same goes for family cults, believe it or not. You're not allowed to fully express who you are. It is not encouraged. Everybody has to believe the same thing and be on the same wavelength as far as, how you present yourself, what you believe, what you look like, even to those minute small things. So though that in a very small nutshell is just how, a family cult in essence is just like a normal cult. The only difference is that it's operating within just the family. And I think it's important to acknowledge that there's overt and covert types of narcissistic abuse and family cults. And what those terms mean is there's the outright cult leader and narcissist that they're just out with it. They're a jerk. Everyone knows they're a jerk. There's no hiding it. They're in charge and you fall in line. And then there's the overt type that they're more manipulative about it. To the general public, they're really great and nice and charismatic and fun to be around, and there's an energy around them, and they just seem like such a genuine, nice person. And then under the surface, there's all this manipulation happening. And as far as rules go and control goes, they don't outwardly say there's rules. They are unspoken rules. They don't outwardly say you can or can't do something. It is unspoken. You just know underneath the surface that if you behave or do something a certain way, there's consequences. And when you face those consequences, you don't like them, and you do everything within your power to never have to be in that space again. And so a lot of times, I didn't know what I was in. I didn't know that I was in a cult until getting out of it and getting therapy and realizing, the fog lifting that, wow, I was being controlled. And because it's so subtle and it's underneath and you're being manipulated, you think you have all the freedom in the world, but in reality, you don't have any freedom at all.
Wow. Well, thank you for walking us through.
Tight
so
nutshell.
We kind of, yeah. So we can kind of have an idea as we go through your story, just that background. And it is so interesting how a cult can just show up in a small group of people. That wasn't something that I ever had heard of before, but in listening to you and understanding it, I can see how it exists more often than we even recognize. And so what I'd love to ask you is, this is a question that I think people ask, whether they ask it outright or not, when they hear these types of stories, like, how did you end up in a situation like this and not realize it? Was there something in your past? Was there a belief? Like, how did you end up in this place? And then once we talk about that, I'd love to hear how you realized what was happening and made a change in that pivotal moment of moving out of the family.
Right. I know. I asked myself that question so many times. How in the world did I end up here? How does this even happen? It's crazy. I grew up. So my story, I was married into this family cult. So I was not raised in this environment and in this cult. And I feel for people who are, because I feel it's even harder to get out of a situation like this, because it's all you've ever known. It's your family. It's how you were raised. And if they're really good at isolating you, it's hard to see anything different. I married into it. And so it's interesting because as I look back and look at how I was raised and the things that my parents taught me, it's difficult to see, how I ended up there. Of all the people that you could look at, people who knew me in high school, who knew me growing up, I would be the last person that they would suspect could be manipulated in such a way. And I say that because I grew up, with a dad who raised me to never let anyone walk all over you. You stand up for yourself. You don't let people take advantage of you. And then I find myself in a situation where that's exactly what is happening. And I was an only child. I grew up I was very independent. I forged my own way. I went away to college. I went away to Bible school, and so I had all of these experiences where I was very independent. I was out on my own. I had a good upbringing and raising of not letting people walk all over you. And so I think for me and my story, when I look back and say, okay, well, how did this happen? How did I end up here? The first key player in that was that I was in love. Right? And we all have those wonderful rose-colored glasses on when we're first falling in love, and everything is just so great and beautiful and wonderful. I also was living in Seattle at the time, and they were in Portland. And so the very beginning stages of my relationship were in two different states. And so I didn't see or fully understand, right, everything and how the family operated when I was first developing this relationship. And so there was that element to it. And then, as I spoke of before, this person within the family cult that was the leader, the narcissist, she was very charismatic. She was warm. She was friendly. She was welcoming. It was just, the initial interactions with her were fun. And the initial interactions with the family were fun. They did fun things together. They were always, going to events and just laughing together and having fun together. And it just seemed so great. It seemed so great. And it wasn't until I started to see glimpses of it. I moved back to Portland when we were, deep into deeper into our dating relationship. And so that relationship was already forming. I was already in love. And so then when I came and moved back to Portland, I started spending more time with the family, and there were red flags. Like, I can't deny there were red flags. I did not want to see those red flags. As independent as I was, and as, raised in a good home and all of that, I still was very naive. I was young. I was in young love, and I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so there was, an ignorance about the real world. And I always was one to give people the benefit of the doubt, to think the best in people. I had no idea that, and that's not true. I did have an idea that evil people were out there. I didn't know evil people also still were really nice and fun and fun to be around. You know what I mean? You put them in this category of, well, they're going to be glaringly obvious. Mean people are mean people, and you see them right away, and that's just not the truth. And so I just was ignorant to that. So I moved back to Portland, and we were in this dating relationship, and the red flags were there. I didn't want to see them. I was in love. I wanted to get married, all of that. Now, the way that this family operated was it was my ex's aunt and uncle, technically his cousins, but because of the age difference, he called them aunt and uncle. And it was her 3 sons, their wives, and their kids, and they all lived under the same household. Now, my ex was a part of that household because his dad left when he was young, and his aunt and uncle were a part of raising him since he was a small child. And so he worked with the family business, and after he graduated high school, and by staying, I'm sure that there was a lot of manipulation and underlying unspoken rules that he was to stay. I do believe that, just from my experience. And so he was living there when we were dating. Now, when we were dating, I always made it very clear, I don't want to live there. It's fun and exciting, and I wanted my own space. I'm a very independent person. I wanted us to have our own space, to have our own household, and all of that. And that was always the plan. When we were talking, that was always the plan. We weren't going to live there. And when he proposed and it came closer to time of actually getting married, there was a whole series and chain of events that I will not get into right now because we simply don't have time. And that is a whole nother podcast episode. So I'll just, stuff happened that in essence made it to where we had to live there. We had to live there. We didn't really have choices. We didn't have options. And so we moved in. And the crazy part is it's that manipulation was there even from day one. Moving into that house, I did not want to move into that house. And my ex came to me and basically told me that I needed to ask permission and basically position myself to sell myself to be worthy of moving into this house with them. And I was just remember thinking in my head, are you kidding me? I don't even want to live there. Why am I having to ask permission to live there when we all know she wants us to live here? Why am I asking to live here? She is really the one asking us to live here. But again, manipulation, let's just twist it. So there I am asking permission to live there and being grilled. Well, what are you going to do with your stuff? And how do you, just like I was in an interview to be somewhere I did not want to be. So from day one, it was crazy making. So I, moved in, and very quickly it just became really bad. On the outside, it was okay, and there was fun things, and there were still fun things in the inside, but the isolation started immediately. I was ridiculed for having friends outside. They would lecture and talk about how family is the most important thing, and you can't trust anyone else. The outside world, like you just can't trust people, and you don't want them in your business, and you shouldn't tell them anything about your family life or your marriage. It's none of their business. They shouldn't be a part of it. Not allowed to do work events. Or I remember one time my job asked me to go to California to train these other people that were a part of our company in another state. And I told them I would, not even like thinking anything of it. Of course, my job's asking me to do something. I'm going to do it. Oh, wow. Did I hear about it? I heard about it. It was not pleasant. And then on top of that, I was told how My work really didn't value me. I was indispensable. They could hire someone tomorrow. I wasn't as important as I thought I was because they were asking me to do this work event. I mean, just on and on and on, just to go do a 1-day training, literally 1 day. We didn't even stay the night. So, isolation from work, discouraged to hang out with anyone. I was allowed to hang out with anyone outside the family. We did everything together communally. Even before we got married, talk about red flags. We never went on a date by ourselves once. Not allowed. Do everything as a family. We went to dinners together, movies together. Everything is done together. You're not allowed to do it just separately as a couple. Like saying that, I can't even believe that I married into that, but that I married someone that I had never been on a date with, just me and him. It's just crazy. Anyways, I can remember my cousin coming to visit and being told, my own family coming to visit from out of state and being told, oh, they don't really want to see you. They feel obligated to see you just because they're in town. So of course they have to reach out and tell you they're in town to meet with you. Just completely pitting the entire outside world against you. And I did go. I pushed against it so much so that I think that that's why I got the brunt of the verbal abuse. I also was the newest one in the clan. And so, but I would fight against it, right? My dad told me, you stand up for yourself, And so my cousin comes to visit and I go to visit him, even though she's telling me all these things. And then I reap the consequences, right? So I get told, oh, well, you're choosing the better party or whatever things that she would say to me. But that night, because I was going to dinner with my cousin, they all went out to dinner, went to a movie, tried to make me feel like I was missing out on what they were doing because I was choosing to spend time with my family. This is the type of manipulation, right? It's not an outward, sometimes it's outward, right? There's the outward verbal. Well, but still, there's manipulation in this. Well, your family doesn't actually want to spend time with you, right? Never in there is you're not allowed to go spend time with your cousin, right? That outward rule of you're not allowed is not there. But what is there is a feeding in my brain and mind about how my family doesn't actually want to see me or spend time with me. Then we're going to go do all this fun stuff so that you feel like you're missing out, so that the next time this opportunity comes up, it will have been so miserable for you, you will choose not to do that again. And that's how she did it. That's how she worked. So isolation was very early on. After moving in, wasn't allowed to do premarital counseling. That wasn't allowed. Heaven forbid a professional mental health person speak into your life, because that would have rocked the boat.
That's risky, right? I mean,
Right.
because
Right.
a professional, they know that if someone starts hearing this that hasn't been brainwashed, right? So much of what you were saying, even in the getting you to question how your work sees you, is to get into your mind and make you not value yourself, not trust yourself. Like,
yes,
you start believing everything they're saying. I mean, I remember, my situation not being family cult so much, but the abuse, the tactics are the same, or dealing with a narcissist. It's very textbook, and so, but I would be so confused on what is even reality. Like, and I would question did I do something to deserve this? I must have. Like, and then I would work so hard to try to not have that happen again. Like, just like you're saying, it becomes so painful that you are subconsciously starting to change who you are in order to not experience what you're experiencing. And again, I didn't consciously realize what I was doing. And you talk about like when it wasn't until you were out of it that you really started recognizing what in the world was really happening there. And that's what makes it so hard to get out of, right? Because when you're in the middle of it, you're so confused,
Right.
you know, and then that they play on that confusion. They make it to where you start believing the things that they say about you. I believe like no one's ever going to want you. No, you'll never have anybody else. Like all of these different things. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I want my family. I want these things, you know? And so they also know how to motivate you by like, what is it that you value? What is important to you? And then they like twist it and get in your head. And that is why when people question, like, how did you ever get here? It was, yes, there were red flags. There were little things, but they were small. They were covert. Like if they just started beating you overtly, you'd be like, oh yeah, this is not this isn't a good situation. It's that slowly boiling a frog where you gradually turn up the temperature that you don't even realize you're dying. That is what you experience in these types of situations. And so then when you're isolated, there's no one who can speak any other truth into your life, and there's no one to get you out. So that's why people stay, and they stay stuck. In addition to the fact, and I don't know if this was in your situation, but most of the time they control things financially. And so being able to see a way to get out, you don't have a home, everything they control. So how do you even get out? How do you even see a path forward when you're like, I don't have anybody who can see what I'm going through. I don't have anywhere to go. And so you, in essence, feel trapped.
100%. Yes, you feel stuck and you're told you can't make it on your own. You can't, you're never going to be able to survive on your own. And, the financial piece of it, in my situation, all my finances were controlled without her ever having access to my bank account. And so people are like, well, how? That doesn't make any sense. She knew exactly how much I made. And she would manipulate ways to get money from me. So we'd go out to dinner and she'd make me pay her bill, right? Costco was my responsibility as the contribution to the household. So she would rack up this Costco list of things that I needed to purchase. I didn't go to Costco without walking out of there with at least $800 worth of stuff. I was buying mayo that we already had 10 jugs of in the pantry, but we'll just add it to the list to make sure that we're getting all this money out. So not having, control over your finances, they also, that element of confusion and that element of not being able to think clearly in the fog comes from them breaking you down. And that's the same in cults. They do the same thing in large cults. They break you down physically, mentally, psychologically, so that you can't think clearly. I can remember I can't even tell you how long. I want to say like almost a year with no hot water. We had no hot water. And it wasn't a priority to fix it. Well, of course it wasn't a priority to fix it because she knew, oh, that's just another way we can make things uncomfortable so that you're exhausted. She had control over what time we went to bed. She would ridicule us if we went to bed too early. Oh, well, she would just make comments. And like you're saying, you want to avoid the comments, as small as they are, right? Because they pile. There's just one comment over another, piles and piles and piles. And you are just worn out from the second you come home. And you don't want to hear it anymore. I don't want to hear how I'm this or I'm that, or I'm doing this wrong. I'm cutting the tomatoes wrong. I'm washing too many towels, whatever it might be. It's so exhausting. And so you try to eliminate those as much as possible, but she would make comments about going to bed early. So I can remember I was operating on 6-7 hours of sleep. I do not do well on 6 or 7 hours of sleep. So you're so exhausted. We didn't eat healthy. She made sure of that. Everyone was obese. I gained 50 pounds in my pregnancy because, I was feeding too, and the baby needed this and the baby needed that. And that's all you're eating. That's not healthy. You need twice as much food, whatever. Like, just so unhealthy. You know how you feel when you're eating like crap and you don't feel good about yourself, even down to the clothes that I wore. We had to do little fashion shows of the clothes that we were going to wear, and she got to pick and choose if it looked good on us or not. And if she didn't think it looked good, we didn't get it. I felt so frumpy in the outfits that I wore. We even had matching outfits. All us girls would have the same shirt, like just crazy, crazy, conforming, making you feel like crap. She told me I need to dye my hair. For those of you that aren't watching the video, I have red hair. Oh, heaven forbid I have beautiful red hair. No, we're dyeing that brown. So I had dyed my hair, just anything to get you to not be you. And they just beat you down and make you feel gross, feel tired, feel exhausted, and it does. You don't see a way out. And for me, I can remember sitting on the toilet in the bathroom. This is my defining moment of I need to get out of here. And I was just sitting on the toilet sobbing. There's no privacy. You're not the only place you can go where someone won't question you is the bathroom. Sobbing on the toilet, saying, Lord, get me out of here. Get me out of here. I need out. And I always like to say, I never fully drank the Kool-Aid. I always had one foot in, one foot out. There was lots of really fun, great things that we did together as a family. Stockholm Syndrome, very real. I loved this woman. Loved her dearly. She verbally abused me every day. And I loved her. It's crazy to say, but I still mourn the loss of the other women in that house. One of them also got out, and I'm so grateful for that because we're connected again. I mourn the loss of the kids in that house. It is not easy. You do love these people, and that makes it that much harder to leave. It makes it that much harder. You have that element. But I came to a point where my marriage was failing. I had suspected that my ex was cheating on me, and he was. I didn't have proof of it at the time, but you just, I knew he was cheating on me. My marriage was unraveling, and my marriage is why I was there in the first place. My marriage is why I ended up in this household. And I just started asking myself, what am I doing here? Why am I still here? This is awful. I need to get out. And I no longer had my marriage holding me there because that was also unraveling. And so I came to a point where I told my ex, I said, I have to get out. I have to get out of here. I don't know if you're coming with me or not or what's happening, but I have to get out. Now, he also too didn't want to be there. And so he was like, yes, let's get out. And, thankful for me, he took the brunt of the decision. He told the family that it was all his decision. They knew better. They saw right through that. And knew that I did not want to be there. But he took the brunt of that. We had a place rented for an entire month before he was able to gather the courage to tell her. It was just sitting there empty for a month because it was so difficult. And even the financial piece you spoke on, I had to basically save $20 a month aside in order to pay the first down on an apartment, because she knew where my money was going and how that was happening, and so I had to put a little bit aside. Then I had to look for places to rent on my lunch break, because if I was 1 minute late from work, she's calling me, where are you at? Why aren't you home yet? Right. I wasn't allowed to go do anything outside of the family. So the only time that I had to look at apartments was during my lunch break. So I'd scramble and just look for places close to my work. That was the only option I had. So finally got enough. And the crazy part of all of that is at any given point, I could have just packed my bags, driven over to my parents' house that was 30 miles away, knocked on the door, said, Mom, Dad, I need help. I'm out. I can't do this anymore. That didn't even cross my mind. I was so foggy. They didn't know the extent of what was going on. They knew stuff was off. They never saw me. I met this family and fell off the face of the earth. And they had a grandson that they saw once a year at Christmas, so they knew something's not right. This isn't normal. This isn't okay. But they didn't know how to help me, but at any given point, I could have just shown up on their doorstep, but I was so foggy. So, just that wasn't even, I didn't even think of it as an option. I needed to get out on my own. So I raised a little bit of money. At this point, I'm having medical issues. I'm having heart palpitations, high blood pressure. That's another thing that drove me to that decision of leaving. I'm not okay. I'm not healthy. The stress and the pressure of what is going on in this household every single day, the anxiety that I feel driving up to the house is incredible. I can't do this anymore. You just come to a breaking point of, I'm either going to have a nervous breakdown or I get out. It's one of the two, and I need to figure it out. So we eventually rented this place. And luckily for me, both me and my ex left together. And therefore I was able to leave with my children, or my child. I only had one child at the time. And I thank God every day for that. I am so grateful that I left when I did, and that my son got out of that when we did, because he doesn't really remember a lot of it, and he doesn't know really what was happening, around him. But the kids that are there now, they're suffering. They're suffering mentally, they're suffering physically, and they're not okay because of what they've been living in. And I'm just so grateful. But it was a long, hard process getting out. And one of the other wives that did get out, her kids are still there. And I can remember the narcissist, telling me so clearly, just in passing. And it's like, why are you even telling me this? Where is this even coming from? I've never expressed leaving. But she made a comment to me of, if you ever leave, I will make sure your son does not go with you. Like this threat, of, if you leave, your son is staying here with us, like, what? And so, like I said, luckily we left together, and my son came with me, and we were able to start to rebuild our lives from there. So,
I think,
yeah.
for the listeners, I think it's important to hear that the process of leaving oftentimes takes a lot of planning,
Yes.
because to do it safely, right, and to get things set up because of the amounts of control that are happening. And so being really aware of protecting yourself, being safe, whether, you luckily, your husband at the time was part of that process, that allowed you that. For me, I had a domestic abuse advocate, and I wouldn't have been able to do it, because I had left many times, and I came back because of, different financial things or threats with, like, oh gosh, my daughter, what's going on with her? I don't want to leave her in that situation. All of these different things that you have to think about. And so getting help and reaching out to someone, like you were saying, you didn't reach out to your parent. Um, you know, this is not something that we can go at alone. It's so complicated, and there is so much fog that goes along with it, that getting some support is really key to this process. And luckily, at the time, your husband was willing to be a support there, kind of take on that role, and help get you out of it. But you still needed the support, in order to do that. And you wouldn't have gotten out of it likely, with your son if you
Yeah.
hadn't had that.
Yeah. And even after we did get out because of the way that we left together and we're still a part of the family, she was still controlling me from afar. And so I was still being controlled by her for about a year, I think, until I did get other help. It wasn't until I got into counseling and started getting mental help that I started to unpack and realize what I was in. And I can remember my counselor telling me, you don't have to go to their Thanksgiving. And I looked at her and I was like, you don't understand. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do have to go to their Thanksgiving. And she said, you don't. You actually get to make that choice for yourself. You get to choose. And it was like mind blown. What? I get to choose? I get to have an opinion? What is that? I don't even remember what that is. And my dad was sick at the time, and my mom would have been left home alone for Thanksgiving with my dad in bed sick, like sick health-wise. He had congestive heart failure. And I was going to do that. I was going to leave my mom home alone for Thanksgiving to go spend Thanksgiving with their family because that was what was expected of me. That was what was required. And when my counselor gave me this permission that I didn't know I needed, that I got to choose, I walked out of that counseling session. I drove home sobbing and laughing at the same time. It was cracking me up. I was laughing out loud while crying at the thought that, oh my goodness, what? I can choose. I can be free of this. And let me tell you, I got a phone call. I heard all about the fact that I didn't show up for family Thanksgiving. And that was the last time I spoke to her. After that, I went no contact, and best decision of my life. And that's when I actually broke free from the control, was by going no contact. But I would have never gotten to that place if I had not gotten help right? I was still being controlled. I was still being manipulated. I still had her in my ear dictating my life from afar. And it wasn't just because I didn't live in the house, didn't mean that she wasn't still having me run errands, telling me where I was going to church, telling me I had to come to family Thanksgiving. It wasn't until I got help and realized, oh my goodness, this woman doesn't have to control my life. I get to make my own decisions. That's when the freedom came and I was able to break away from it.
Yeah, I think, a lot of times in these types of situations with the narcissistic personality and sociopath characteristics, the only way to break free is to go no contact, because they are so manipulative that there is no respect for boundaries.
No.
That you can't have a relationship with someone like that, because there is no relationship. Like you said, it's your way or the highway. It's only their terms. And that is not a relationship. That is somebody who is controlling you, and you are there for their benefit and their benefit alone. So if you find yourself in a situation where you can't say no, where you are so exhausted, jumping through every hoop, and there is no cooperation or collaboration or meeting you in the middle, giving to you sometimes, it's going to be really important for you to start asking yourself questions, just like you were saying as you were sitting there on the toilet and you're crying and you're asking questions like, how do I get out of here? And as you start accepting the reality, that's what's really hard, because we don't want to admit, especially, I'm very much like you, very independent, grew up in a home that I wouldn't have expected to find myself in these situations. So there was a lot of shame. There was pride that I didn't really even want to admit the reality of where I was. But that denial plays to the benefit of the abuser, because they're going to capitalize on that. And then you can't ever change anything you're not willing to acknowledge. And so when you start getting honest, that most often comes in a very broken place. That is where the journey to something different can begin. And I would just encourage you, if you are there, is to look for some way to get the support that you need, because you won't be successful going at it alone. That's why in the domestic abuse world, it's about, I think, an average of 7 times that someone attempts leaving, because it is so hard to break these habits and patterns. Our mind is such a powerful thing, and it can work in our favor, but it can also work against us, because we develop these ways of thinking and responding, and it takes a lot of effort to change those. And like you said, you were so exhausted, you weren't sleeping good, you had all of these health things. Well, the last thing you're going to be able to do in that situation is to start taking on more things and more work, and it's so hard. So first and foremost is getting support and starting to do things to take care of yourself, so that you can have the energy and the ability to think through what do you do next. So I really appreciate you kind of walking us through your journey of how you even got into this situation, what it looked like, where you had the pivotal moment and how you started to plan for your escape from the situation, and then how you began that healing process. So tell us a little bit about, now that you have navigated through this, like, how are you using all of this hard to make a difference in your own children's life or your community? What is it that you dream of doing? You shared a little bit about it with me before, and I just love when people start taking everything that they learned in the hard to make a difference so that others can benefit from their learning.
Yeah. I am a firm believer in beauty out of ashes. And so my plan is to take all of this experience and make as much beauty out of it as I possibly can. And so I know, sharing my story on podcasts like this, and just even with people and random conversations, bringing awareness, bringing light to, that these manipulative people are out there, right? And there's also healing and walking with people who have similar stories and similar journeys. And so sharing my story, being open, not being afraid to share that is definitely one way. Even in small little things, like even my business. I'm an interior designer. I own my own business, and within that business, my tagline, the name of the company is Studio Red. My tagline is respectfully expressing you through design. And the experience I had of not being able to be myself, right? Having to change the style of my glasses, take my nose ring out, being ridiculed for having tattoos, all the things, dyeing my hair brown, all the things that were changed about me to make me feel like I wasn't allowed to like what I liked. It made me realize that, we are all so unique. And we all have different preferences, and we all have different likes. And so even down to my design business, it is extremely important to me that my clients, the home that we are designing for them, reflects them, their style, their characteristics. It's not about me. It's not about what I like. It's not about being the designer and designer knows best. No, it's about the client. At the end of the day, it's their home. They're living in it. They need to feel comfortable. And so knowing and acknowledging that we are all uniquely made and we all have opinions, and to respect that for each other and not think that we know best or one way's the right way. Even those little things, I have implemented in my life and wanted to change in areas. My long-term goal, what I would love to do is to be able to provide housing for people who are getting out of these situations. I looked and looked and looked for an apartment that I couldn't afford, and it was so difficult, and it was really hard being able to pay that rent. And so I want to be able to provide some way or partner with a nonprofit that is already doing this to provide that housing, to provide that transition, that also provides resources to people, that gets them into counseling, that gets them into reading books and realizing they're not crazy. That's the number one thing I did, is I read all the books, and it was like helped lift oh, wait, okay, I'm not crazy. This is not okay, because you're just in such a fog. And so having an organization that, helps people who need to get out. Okay, let me help you get out. Here's a house. Here's connections, here's literature, here's all the things, to help start to build that foundation of rebuilding their lives. So that's my big goal.
I love it.
Later on down the road. Yeah.
And
I'm excited about it, but I think
love that you talk about being vulnerable. I think what this community is all about is just allowing people a space to be honest and vulnerable and recognize that, you can change your life, you can rebuild your life, and to bring hope by just allowing people into our stories and seeing the journey so that they can, when you're so desperate and you're in such a dark place, it's hard to believe that something else is possible. But by people being able to hear stories of how people moved through those hard things, it's so empowering. And so I just honor you for being willing to be a light into someone's darkness and for just sharing your wisdom. I think if you listen to our podcast, there are so many things that are just the same things that are being said over and over in different scenarios. And it's important to have community. It's important to get curious and read and understand so that you can have more clarity, because clarity will help to calm that chaos in your mind and allow you to move forward. And then to be compassionate with yourself, learning who you are. I love your tagline and how you are using that even in your business, because it is so important to rediscover who are you, what are your values, what do you want, so that you can build a path from where you are to where you want to be. And it's not a one size fits all approach because of our uniquenesses, and you did such a beautiful job highlighting that. So thank you, Jen, for joining me today. And you guys, we will link you to Jen's business, Studio Red. I'm going to ask her to share if she had any books that really stood out. So make sure you check the show notes. And if you need to get in touch with someone to talk about your situation, I am happy to put you in contact with Jen, or I'm here, one of our coaches, to help you as you're maybe looking at your life and saying, is this happening to me? We want to be there to support you. You are not alone. And so please reach out. And even if you're not local to this area, we work with people all over the country, and we will help you find the resources that you need, even if it's not to be coached by one of us, because we are here wanting to see people be able to break free and become their most amazing, authentic self and live a purposeful and fulfilled life. So thank you for listening today, and we look forward to seeing you back next week for another inspiring story. So have a great week, and we will see you soon.
This podcast is intended only for educational, inspirational, and entertainment purposes. The purpose of this podcast is not to replace the counsel of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org.